Sorry for the delay. I have a well, I trying to make it better for you here on Talk Live on such an eventful day. I made sure that I got my I'm streaming wired into my laptop, so everything is running smoothly now. A bit quicker, a bit better now. So we are wired. We are not wireless. We are not operating on Wi-Fi. So yeah, welcome back to Talk Live, ladies and gentlemen. On this momentous day, momentous occasion in the Diddy trial, the verdict is in, ladies and gentlemen, and it was an absolute bombshell here, people. But before we start that, thank you very much for joining me here on Talk Live, live on IG and YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here to well talk to about the eventful day in the Diddy trial, the verdict of the Diddy trial, in which Diddy got off. Uh, figures. He beat case, as the kids would say, with regards to the sex trafficking and the RICO slash racketeering charges on this person. The only thing that he was held responsible for is the Mann Act, the Mann Act offense, which was prostitution, bringing prostitutes over state lines for the use of sexual gratification, ladies and gentlemen. So that is all he was charged for. However, there was a twist in the actual verdict. Well, after the verdict, and that was that Diddy was not allowed to leave custody because they saw him as being a risk to society, and so and a danger to society in and of itself. So they kept him in until the verdict, which will be held in October. You got it, October. He's got another 3 months in custody, another 3 months in jail until his day of sentencing arrives, and then he will know his fate and how long, if at all, he'll be kept in prison. So let's get into it right now. Talk live, ladies and gentlemen. Do leave your comments here on IG, YouTube, and yes, I'm just making sure we are good to go. That is 15. Yes, okay. Yes. So we're only going to YouTube right now, ladies and gentlemen. So see if I can recognize quick. And give me a second. Give me one quick second. Let me see if I do this. Let's see here. Let's see. Uh-huh. Let me see if I can get myself onto Instagram here. Create my video. All right. Let's back a bit. Give me 1 second here, people. My bad. All right. Doing this on the fly. We build it as we fly it, as many cable stadiums would say. Here we go. Copy. All right. Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. We go there. We do that. We go. Uh huh. Get that next. Copy that. Uh-huh. So I am. Right. So let's see if that works out any better. Okay. We're sending data, and I'm trying to get myself to talk my Instagram page, and we're streaming on Instagram. So thank you very much for joining me here on Talk Live. Sorry about that little delay there, but we are streaming on Instagram and we're streaming on YouTube, ladies and gentlemen, for the Diddy verdict. And what a day it was, ladies and gentlemen. So let's not waste any more time. Thank you very much for joining me here on Talk Live. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Sorry for the delay, but we are not wired into the computer, which means for better, more video overall, better uploading overall, and so let me just get into my YouTube page, ladies and gentlemen. With the one and only, going with Nate Lawyer, we're going with TMZ tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Just gonna get my face on the screen here, and let's just get into this. The Diddy win. Now we're just gonna fly off. I thought this guy's this was a memorable verdict reactions that was coming from Nate Lawyer. We have been following Nate Lawyer throughout this trial, and he's done wonderful work for us. And he is back here again to let us know how this verdict went down. So let us get into it, ladies and gentlemen. We are gonna move this a little bit forward. Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, no wasting time, no delaying. Let's get into it with via the help of ABC News, as it was broadcast this morning on ABC News. We're using the feed from Nate the Lawyer. So let's get into it.
Sean Combs is now seated at the defense table, Kira, with his attorneys. Judge Arun Subramanian has just taken the bench, instructing everyone in the courtroom to maintain decorum when the verdict is reached. It comes after about 14 hours of deliberations over 3 days, and it comes after the jury became stuck on the top charge of racketeering conspiracy, saying they had reached a unanimous verdict on 4 of 5 counts, sex trafficking and transportation for the purposes of prostitution, but had become stuck when it came to the racketeering conspiracy charge. And it's a complicated charge because it required the jury to believe that Combs, if they were to convict, was the leader of a criminal enterprise who relied on his assistants and bodyguards and other employees to commit crimes with him. And there were 8 to...
And as I'm being told now, the jury is entering the courtroom.
Jury's coming in.
Just a little bit of color from early this morning. Apparently, Sean Combs was allowed a moment with his family. They prayed together. Tell us about that, Aaron.
This was not the first time that Sean Combs has prayed in the courtroom. The judge was not on the bench. He asked the marshals for permission.
So as you can see in this jury, it's made up of 8 men, 4 women. Usually it's the juries are made up of 11 people. This was made up of 12 in this prosecution from the U.S. Attorney's Office. This federal court is made up of 12 jurors, not the usual 11. Let's continue.
To speak with his family. There's an entire row in the gallery, the second row of the gallery, reserved for Combs's family members, his mother, twin daughters and sons, all there, other family members in the courtroom as well. And he asked them to hold hands, bow their heads, and pray. And that's when Sean Combs asked for blessings for his family and also for the jury. That jury is now entering the courtroom, Kira.
And I'm told the jury is seated now. Brian Buckmeyer, our legal contributor, I want to bring you in on this. I'm going to have you comment on that in just a second. But let's talk about the RICO charge, the toughest charge here, but would bring the...
My prediction, I don't know. They've come to a fast decision this morning on RICO, and they've come to consider
the predicate crimes and whether Sean Combs is not guilty or guilty. On count 1, the racketeering conspiracy charge, Sean Combs has been found not guilty.
Not guilty on RICO.
Of racketeering conspiracy, perhaps the most
not guilty on
charge
RICO
for the jury to understand. The count 1 had provided for a number of predicate acts, but the jury does not have to get into that because they have found Sean Combs not guilty
is not guilty
a criminal
of RICO.
Enterprise.
That's RICO, so RICO is not guilty.
Racketeering conspiracy. They will now.
So again, RICO being the racketeering charge. This is the racketeering charge where his group of companies, including Revolt, including Bad Boy Records and et al., were considered a criminal enterprise, a criminal organization, and the jury stated that they were not criminal organizations; they were legitimate organizations, and thus no RICO charge was levied against Sean P. Diddy Combs.
Move to the other 4 counts.
So now they're going
2
through
of
the
them
other
on
counts.
Sex trafficking and on and we have not guilty now on count 2 which was sex trafficking of Cassandra Ventura. Sean
Not
Combs
guilty
has
for
been
sex
found
trafficking.
not guilty
Not
of
guilty
sex trafficking
part
when
2.
it comes to his former girlfriend, Cassie
So I think
Ventura.
he's got it. I think
there was a real debate that the jury heard over the course of the last
not
2
guilty.
months about consent
Rico, not
and
guilty,
coercion
sex trafficking.
and the complications of deciding when an 11-year relationship between Combs and Cassie Ventura may have become a criminal one. And the jury decided it was not criminal sex trafficking.
Not guilty on 2 counts.
So therefore, on many of these relationships, that the 2 key relationships in which Diddy was charged with regard to sex trafficking, those relationship with Cassie Ventura and Jane, these were seen as consensual relationships and not involving any sort of sex trafficking. I state it again. These 2 relationships Diddy was involved with were considered, and in which the U.S. Attorney's Office based their case, they were considered consensual relationships and not and not one of sex trafficking, not one of any sort of relationship regarding force, of force, violence, or coercion, ladies and gentlemen. So these were consensual relationships, so therefore no sex trafficking charge against Diddy. Let's continue.
Combs committed what his attorneys freely admitted was domestic abuse.
So he said just domestic abuse, not
video.
sex trafficking.
He has been found not guilty now on racketeering conspiracy, not guilty on sex trafficking.
Not guilty
of
conspiracy.
Cassie Ventura.
Rico, not guilty
sex trafficking. He has been found guilty on count 3. Transportation for the
Mann Act. I told you the Mann Act.
Transportation for the purposes of prostitution. He has also been found guilty on count 5. Transportation for the purposes of prostitution. These charges carry a maximum penalty of up to 10 years in prison.
Guilties.
So we do have a split verdict. Sean Combs has been found not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of sex trafficking Cassandra Ventura, but he has been found guilty on 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. And we're waiting for one more count, the sex trafficking
verdicts
of Jane.
So we got one more.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as you heard quite eloquently there by ABC News, Diddy was indeed guilty of falling foul of the Mann Act, and that was involving prosecution over state lines. So you're not allowed, and this is something that is pretty much antiquated. It's a very old law in which follow prohibition, pre-prohibition, post-prohibition, in which no one is allowed to carry or to take prostitutes over state lines for the use of sexual gratification. So therefore, Diddy wasn't, and everybody knew pretty much Diddy was guilty of that. There was no doubt about that. So if there was anything that Diddy was going to be charged for, it was indeed for his filing of the Mann Act and for prostitution over state lines. Let's continue.
Jury has decided that Sean Combs is not guilty
of sex trafficking.
His former girlfriend, who testified under the pseudonym Jane.
So not guilty on sex trafficking, not guilty on RICO, guilty on transportation
with his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura.
Now, one thing that must be stated here that there are 2 counts here. So they're going through the RICO Act on Jane, and there is RICO Act on Cassie Ventura. So that's the reason why they had to read it twice. So with regards to prostitute involving flouting the Mann Act, involving sex trafficking and use of the being flouting the RICO Act, and that is forming predicate grounds for RICO. He was considered not guilty on sex trafficking and RICO, and guilty with regards to prostitution over state lines with regards to Cassie, and the same thing happened with Jane. So that's the reason for the 2 counts. So he's guilty on 2 counts of prostitution over state lines with regards to Cassie and with regards to Jane. So that's the reason why he's hit with 2 counts. So again, these will be adjudged concurrently. So again, Diddy escaped the biggest charges, which would have landed him life in prison, which was the RICO charge, which is operation of a criminal organization, because his organization wasn't used for the jury found that his organization Bad Boy et al. Were not his businesses were not used for the use of any crimes in and of itself, and his relationships with Cassie and with Jane were consensual. They were actually consensual, and this was through and these were through the emails and through the text messages going back and forth between all three individuals. So therefore, listen, it's a masterstroke. It's a literal masterstroke conducted by the defense here by not calling any sort of uh, expert witnesses or any sort of character witnesses speaking towards Diddy. They just literally let the evidence play out for itself, and they won it quite simply on the closing argument offered by Mark Nifiglo and his team. So credit to them. It's a huge, huge win for the defense here, and a huge loss for the prosecution. Their case was built, literally built, and usually, especially for the Southern District of New York, where they have a 98% conviction rate. For Diddy to slide on the two biggest charges of RICO and sex trafficking, that is indeed a huge loss for that team who spent years, who used every sort of government, of federal government leverage, including HSI, FBI, et al., in order to try to convict Diddy of said charges and, well, throw him in jail for life. But a jury of Diddy's peers decided that indeed all said evidence was not beyond a reasonable doubt, and it didn't rise to the level of beyond a reasonable doubt, and thus Diddy was not charged for sex trafficking in RICO, which could have left him in a whole heap of trouble and life imprisonment. Let's continue. So well done to the defense team of Sean P. Diddy Combs. Let's go.
And a woman who testified under the pseudonym Jane were not criminal, did not involve sex trafficking. All Sean Combs has been
so he will probably get probation.
Transportation for the purposes
not
of
guilty,
prostitution.
3 of the 5 counts.
Those did seem to be the most evident crimes that Sean Combs committed. We heard testimony.
Now, the reason why the Nate the lawyer says that he may get probation is the fact that indeed Diddy has been in jail for most of the year. These are known as slap on the wrist offenses, but the twist in the tail, the sting in the tail, the twist in the story really came up when it came to for Diddy to was demanded by the defense by his defense team, by his defense counsel, to free him on bail until his sentencing. And Diddy was not released on said charges. We'll get to that a little later. But again, for the biggest charges, Diddy was considered not guilty, and that is a huge win for Sean P. Diddy Combs, as explained. Let's continue.
From the male escorts, the jury heard about the cash that they were paid, and as
just to recap, Sean Combs has been found not guilty. RICO conspiracy, not guilty on all counts. Not guilty on both the sex trafficking counts. He didn't sex traffic Cassie. He did not sex traffic Jane Doe. But I admit it, I thought Jane Doe was a liar. I just didn't believe Jane Doe. So not guilty on those.
Jane Doe. Let me say this about Jane Doe. Jane Doe, well, she was not exactly a hospitable witness in the prosecution. I think that more than ever really led to the downfall of the prosecution's case here. She was not a very good witness. I think she was brought there on subpoena. She had to testify. So she testified, but she wasn't exactly forthcoming with any groundbreaking evidence that would, well, bring Diddy the book and convict him of RICO or sex trafficking. Quite simply, she wanted the relationship to continue. She saw the relationship she had with Diddy as consensual. She was there when Diddy was first charged with the RICO charge, and also was there when he issued his apology to Cassie for the beating at the Intercontinental Hotel in 2016. So she was not a witness that the prosecution could rely on for the most part. I think she did a real solid for the defense case, and that's where you really saw the tide turning for the likes of Sean P. Diddy Combs. And yeah, I think it was a mistake that they brought her to trial, a huge mistake on their part. And I really wondered why Christine Coram wasn't exactly subpoenaed to bring her evidence to book, because she would have been a key witness to things, because she basically saw it all and would have given some some groundbreaking foundational evidence for Sean P. Diddy Combs to be considered guilty of sex trafficking and RICO charge. But again, that was a mistake of the prosecution, in which Diddy profited from, and eventually was considered not guilty for sex trafficking and for the RICO charge. Let's continue.
So essentially, he's done with those. The two counts, the two Mann Act counts, they found him guilty for sure. So there's two felonies. He's probably going to get probation. I would believe he's probably going to be walking down to that. So just so we all are on the same page, RICO done, sex trafficking done. The only thing you got him on is guilty of the Mann Act. So there it is. There it is. Sean Combs, not guilty on the most serious charges, guilty for the two Mann Act violations. Wow. That's what I said. This is crazy. This is crazy. So I don't know, but with all the drugs and all that stuff, I think the defense attorneys did a fantastic job in making sure this jury believed this was all just nonsense and not something. Even though, to be honest with you, I would have found him guilty on the RICO, and I think I would have found him guilty on the Cassie, but I wouldn't have found him guilty on the Jane Doe. So I agree with the jury on the Jane Doe. So just so we're clear on the 5 charges. I think I have a PowerPoint up that has those 5 charges. But yeah, so they found him not guilty on. So we have. So the verdict: transportation to engage in prostitution. These are the only 2 he was found guilty of. Everything else is not guilty. So, and it's a maximum of 10 years in prison. So these 2 he's found guilty. And those are the 2 where I think.
And remember, the 2 counts are for the 2 women, that being Jane and Cassie. That's the reason why you see 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution, 2 counts of sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. That's what I was trying to find. That's the verbiage I was trying to find out in my head that I fell foul of. Excuse me for that. Sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion. You have 2 counts because you have 2 people of whom the federal U.S. Federal Prosecutor's Office were trying to base these crimes for. That was for Jane and for Cassie. That's where you have 2 counts, 2 accusers of sex trafficking, and then the RICO charge is one all-encompassing charge against Diddy, in which he was found not guilty. So let this continue.
Everyone knew, like, the money was there, all that stuff was there. It was just those were obvious, right? The prostitutes are on the stand saying, "Yeah, he flew me out to have sex." So those are good. Now it's interesting because those 2 counts alone could have gotten you RICO, but they said they don't believe this was a racketeering conspiracy. This is personal. Sex trafficking by fraud, force, and coercion. Both those counts, not guilty. He did not sex traffic Cassie.
Again, a very good point raised there by Nate the lawyer. Yes, indeed. Transportation to engage in prostitution. Those 2 counts, if he was convicted guilty, would have led to a RICO charge. That is not usually said, but it needs to be brought up here. If transportation to engage in prostitution, Diddy was convicted guilty of, that would have led to a RICO charge among the other predicate offenses. So Diddy was really fighting for his life here on 2 fronts, and that is the sex trafficking front and the transportation front. If any of these 2 charges he was convicted of, he would have gone to jail on a RICO charge for a very, very long time. So well done to the defense counsel in this case. And again, we'll explain to this a little later. This is a big victory, not only for Diddy, not only for men everywhere, but a big loss with regards to the Me Too movement. And it's head of steam. It was carrying into with the Harvey Weinstein case, with regards to the Bill Cosby case, R. Kelly case, et al. Let's continue.
Did not sex traffic the other woman. And the last count 5, RICO conspiracy, he has been found not guilty. So he is free and clear. He will be, if he gets more than a year in prison for any of this stuff, for the 2 counts that he was found guilty of, these 2, I'd be shocked. So Sean Combs.
Well, again, I would say he may get a year each for each charge, because prostitution is really a slap on the wrist. it is an antiquated law, to be fair, and it is severely changed over time, and it is constantly flouted on for lack of a better word. So this could be seen as a concurrent charge, and to be fair, this would have been time served with not being allowed to not being allowed parole until sentencing. So again, time served. He's already served a year in prison. With that time served, indeed, Nate the lawyer is right. He may just get a year. With that year with his time served already performed by Diddy over the last year, so he may just get a year, ladies and gentlemen. But again, that remains to be seen. Let's continue.
Has been found not guilty on the most serious counts. That is what it is. So,
as prosecutors told them, they were not in those hotel rooms for scintillating conversation. Sean Combs guilty of
even if you were to take both sentences, and he's not going to get 10 years.
No, he's not going to
look at his criminal history, mitigating circumstances, aggravating circumstances, and I would.
And I'd like to point out the fact that why he's not going to get 10 years. This is his first offense, ladies and gentlemen. His first two offenses, really. But his first offense of prostitution. He's never been convicted of a prostitution charge. So he's not going to get an exorbitant amount of time for said charges. So don't be surprised if you see him getting in for a year, because this is the first offense. It's a slap on the wrist. Usually, it could be said that the book could be thrown at him for prostitution, but with being his first offense, I doubt that'll happen, ladies and gentlemen. So don't be surprised if you see a year being handed out to Diddy for these charges. Let's continue.
Assume that he gets somewhere in the middle ground, maybe like 3 to 5 years, 3 to 6 years, possible for that sentencing range for each count. Sean Combs going to trial where he was facing life and being able to walk out with something under 10 years, under 10 years possibly, that is a victory. Will he appeal?
No doubt.
That's his right to do so.
This is a victory for Sean.
I don't see an appeal here. I think you take this as a win. You serve the few years that you may get, and you be happy that you didn't get life. I'm.
And you remember, Diddy, if he does get a few years with good behavior, he could be out in half the time. He could be out in half the time, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining me here in Talk Live. But yes, he could be out in half the time. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Want to hear you in the chat. Would love to hear you about this Diddy verdict, because this is groundbreaking. It is monumental, and Diddy beat case. The revenge tour coming soon. Let's continue.
Somewhat shocked as to the trafficking for Cassie. I thought that might have been a stronger case for the government. I didn't think that they had the RICO, and I definitely didn't think they had the Jane trafficking. But
he's like me. He didn't think they had.
I think it only so many words, and I keep saying it. I think this is a positive result for Sean Combs and his team.
Yeah, this
I'm
is
being told
positive.
Now.
Again, this Jane was a terrible witness for the prosecution. A huge error by the U.S. Attorney's Office to bring Jane to the stand, because Jane was a reluctant witness. Jane wished she was totally consensual with everything Diddy was doing. Yes, she was visited upon her certain instances of violence. However, that is in part the reason why Diddy wasn't released, because all these instances of violence, Diddy was seen as a public risk and thus was not allowed out on parole until his sentencing. But again, if asked if one asked Jane if she wished to continue her relationship with Diddy, she would do so wholeheartedly. She was a reluctant witness, and again, a huge faux pas for the prosecution not calling Christine Coram to the stand. Let's continue.
Combs is hugging his lawyer at this very moment.
Damn right, you got to hug those lawyers.
As you are seeing it as well.
I'd be hugging them
too. We should
too.
point out, Brian. Let's look at bigger picture here. He is a music producer. He created a brand around himself. He was a big part of bringing hip hop into the mainstream. There is an entire entertainment business side to this. How do you see, from your experience, this win, as you are saying, for Sean Combs? How will it impact his business empire?
I think it just goes on.
I think, for lack of a better term, there was always going to be a blemish on Sean Combs' career.
I think
people are going to look at this in two different ways. In one way, they're going to say that Sean Combs probably had a history of getting into trouble with the law and somehow getting out from underneath it. They're going to look at past events through both civil and criminal complaints and say, you know what, he's always had good lawyers or whatever it may be, and he's gotten away with bad charges, especially looking at that Intercontinental video. But I think the other view of this is going to be is that he was tried by a jury of his peers.
Yeah.
All of the information, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and everything in between was shown to these 12 people, and they did not see the criminal enterprise.
They did not see the criminal enterprise.
The force, fraud, and coercion.
That's right.
And I think the trafficking to engage in prostitution, I think that's going to be a lighter blemish on his career in terms of the totality of what we saw, as to like, okay, so he paid for people to go across state lines to have
sex with them. Yeah,
consensual sex.
That's the minor
and I think consensual sex will be a big part of the conversation based on how the verdict came out.
And so,
do I think he takes a big knock in terms of this case? Yes, but we've seen Sean Combs rebrand and come back from a lot of things, and that is a possibility here.
I think they got it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Diddy wins here in more ways than one, and in this way in particular. The way hip hop works, it thrives in a certain way, shape, or form, negativity, especially bad press, especially if you have gone through the wire and beat case. If you have been through the wire, if you have taken slings and arrows and come through scot-free and clean, your reputation within the industry is elevated, not denigrated. When Diddy's out, Diddy is going to be a bigger star within the industry than ever before. Ever before. Simply because, as stated, hip-hop is, in certain capacities, a positive art form. Hip-hop music is a positive art form, but the art form that Diddy's involved with, for a person to be case, for a person to be exonerated, to be found not guilty on certain counts against him, and being allowed back in public, it'll make him an even bigger star. It'll make him an even bigger problem for his enemies out there. Because, again, he now has the street cred. There's something about street cred that makes a star a superstar. And now Diddy is one of the biggest stars in hip-hop right now, without question. Those who wish to turn their back on him, beware. But do remember, this industry, well, not this industry, but this genre of music thrives on negative aspects, especially if you've been through negative court cases and you've come out the other end shining. Diddy is now a huge star. No doubt about it. You can play his music without any sort of recrimination. You couldn't do that so much with R. Kelly. You don't really hear R. Kelly songs anymore. You're going to hear Diddy songs a lot now. A lot. A lot of people are going to be dancing to Diddy again. Before, he was, a bit of a bad seed, a bit of a dirty secret, but now he's not a secret anymore. Now it's not considered bad for your career to be seen with Diddy, especially after he has been exonerated for his crimes, and only be given a slap on the wrist, and that is for prostitution overstate, ladies and gentlemen. So he's a big star now more than ever. Let's continue.
Right. But let's put it into the context, Aaron Katursky, of the Me Too movement.
That's true.
I don't think anybody can forget the video, the surveillance video.
Well, just to be clear, this is not like R. Kelly was charged essentially with the same stuff. RICO, and they got him on everything, right? They got Harvey Weinstein. It was RICO too. So P. Diddy is probably the first one to get out of the RICO charge. And
the reason why is because all of it was consensual. The thing about the difference between between him and R. Kelly was R. Kelly held people against their will to do whatever sexual perversions he wanted. You could, it was clear to see that people were kept holed up in houses, kept in stashed away from people's parents. He was dealing with underage children. His he it wasn't exactly a criminal enterprise, but he acted in a criminal way, which allowed the RICO charge to stick. Not so much here because at first it was seen by Cassie and Jane and many others that they were complicit in this. They actually wanted to participate in these freak offs. It wasn't that Diddy was held everyone at gunpoint saying strip and let's get naked and let's get down to business. No, Cassie did it herself. Where should we have this? How should this be staged? Who shall I call in to enjoy these freak offs? I so badly want to freak off. Same for Cassie as it was for Jane, and I think that's the difference between two cases of Diddy and R. Kelly is the fact that where R. Kelly held his sexual well, I wouldn't say conspirators. He held his victims against their will to have sex with them. Diddy didn't. Diddy. Let's continue.
Because of this, but he did it though. He did it, and the sex trafficking. I think, I think this case was lost because the prosecutors, the Jane Doe sex trafficking. I think that's where this case was lost because, like I was saying yesterday when we were doing the partial verdict, the Jane Doe sex trafficking. I just didn't believe it. I would have been a not guilty on Jane Doe sex trafficking too. Cassie was a little different. Jane Doe, it just wasn't. It just wasn't there. And also with the RICO, the reason why this result doesn't make a lot of sense is because the two counts that they found him guilty of are RICO predicates. So they can say, okay, they've already essentially found the RICO predicates. Those two charges that he was found guilty of are RICO predicates. But the problem is that you also got to find that this was a criminal organization, right? This was a mob, or this was like a street gang, or he was doing this on behalf of the business. So now they're saying, well, you know what? We don't believe it was a criminal organization. We believe all this was.
Again, this wasn't a criminal organization. Bad Boy Records is not a criminal organization, even though it was created for the personal enjoyment of Diddy. Make that abundantly clear. The one who profited from Bad Boy Records was Diddy himself. Revolt was a legitimate enterprise. Anything that Diddy touched, any sort of enterprise that Diddy touched, was a legitimate enterprise. It was not a criminal organization. So you couldn't put a RICO charge on Diddy if he wasn't involved in any criminal organizations. He was perverted, yes, but criminally organized? Technically, no. Let's continue.
Personal. I think that's where it is. And I think when it comes to Cassie, I think Jane Doe's testimony hurt Cassie because Jane Doe was kind of like just a go.
And I said that on Talk Live as well. I said Cassie's testimony Jane's testimony was going to hurt Cassie's testimony. It would limit it. It would absolutely do so. It would absolutely limit Cassie's the true damage that Cassie's testimony had against Diddy. I think Jane was the wrong person to bring to the stand. I think that is where indeed the prosecution really messed up in bringing forward Jane, because Jane wanted to participate in Freak Out and still does to this day. She loves her transactional relationship with Diddy. Believe it or not, she does. And because again, Jane Doe knew that she would never find another Diddy. So anything he wanted to do, she would do gladly, and still would love to do gladly. Remember, she was subpoenaed. She did not want to bring a case to Diddy, nor does she have a lawsuit against him. Remember that. Now or pending, or previous or pending now. Let's continue.
Gold digger, and then you put Cassidy in. It's kind of like well, these are really just two women who got paid. You know, they went through hell, but they got well compensated for it. And that's just what it is. So, woo, this was an interesting verdict. This was a very interesting verdict. But
so we're gonna leave it there with my man Nate the Lawyer. Nate the Lawyer's done wonderful work here. Please subscribe to Nate the Lawyer. He's doing wonderful things in YouTube streets. A very, I mean, he cuts through the bull and really gives you, what you need to know about everything legal, especially with regards to these high-profile cases. So shout out to Nate the Lawyer doing wonderful things in YouTube streets. And yeah, please give him a like and subscribe because he's doing. Shoot, I gotta give him a like and subscribe. He's done wonderful things. Again, this is fair use, fair use, fair use. Let's get into it. Let's move on here. But again, that was a shocker. It was a shocker, for the lack of a better word. And let's hear from the lawyers themselves. This is the defense team, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear what they have to say about the verdict. As you can see, very, very happy about what went on to.
Thank you all for being patient. Am I speaking loud enough? You all can hear me okay? All right.
Again, this is the lead lawyer, Mark Agnifilo. He's the one whose reputation is soaring after this Diddy trial. Many of these lawyers, I think their careers are made through this Diddy trial. That's why they're all smiling, because they know their retainers are that much bigger after this huge victory on their behalf. Let's continue.
Today's a great victory. It's a great victory for Sean Combs. It's a great victory for the jury system. You saw that the Southern District of New York prosecutors came at him with all that they had. They're not stopping, but one thing stands between all of us and a prison, and that is a jury of 12 citizens. And we had a wonderful jury. They listened to every word, and they got the situation right, or certainly right enough. They acquitted him of the sex trafficking, which he was absolutely innocent of. They acquitted him of the racketeering conspiracy that he was absolutely innocent of, and all of the components to it. The kidnapping, he was innocent of that. The arson, he was innocent of that. The obstructing justice, he was innocent of that. And that is no longer just me saying that. That is the verdict of our jury. So today is a great day. Today is a win. Today is a victory of all victories for Sean Combs and our legal team. And I want to say one thing. There are very few people around whom a legal team could coalesce and become one. And Sean Combs is that person, and we are all blessed to be part of it. And I am now done speaking to you, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Garagos.
Before we get into Ms. Garagos, a wonderful job there by Mark Agnifilo. He's again as lead attorney on this defense team. He's done magnificent work, and I don't know if he or one of his cohorts decided not to bring any character or expert witnesses to trial and let the evidence speak for itself. But a masterstroke, a literal masterstroke on their behalf. But let's hear from Ms. Garagos. I believe she is. I believe she's daughter of Mark Garagos, another famous attorney. I don't know if they related, but let's continue with this.
Right, I first want to thank my client, Sean Combs, for trusting us, myself, and everybody here, this incredible dream team that he put together. Without him, we would not have been able to do this. He is incredible, and I want to thank him. I want to thank the jury for putting such great care into this case. They came early every single day, and I want to thank them, as I said in my opening, standing between all of us and the drastic consequences of the criminal convictions of sex trafficking and RICO is a jury of our peers. And I thank them. I want to thank the judge, and I want to thank, despite the terrible conditions at the MDC, I want to thank the good people who worked there, who ensured that we had sufficient amount of time to prepare for trial. It is extremely difficult to prepare for a federal case in the conditions at the MDC, and they did everything they could to make that happen. I want to thank them. I also have been saying this since the beginning of this case.
Before she goes to say that, I told you here on Talk the Metropolitan Detention Center is one of the most heinous, well, understaffed, terrible of condition places for any inmate in and of itself awaiting trial. It's deplorable the conditions, ladies and gentlemen. Very draconian in looking shape, and she's absolutely right. For them to indeed formulate a defense for Sean P. Diddy Combs in such conditions is a fantastic job. Let's continue.
Case, Sean Combs has not sexually assaulted anybody. I've been saying this for months. We've said it with each lawsuit that came out, and today that was proven true. The media got it wrong about Sean Combs every single day for nearly 2 years. I ask that for every time you guys see a civil lawsuit, criminal complaints or criminal indictments, you actually take a look and analyze these and see whether or not these are actually going to stand up in a court of law, because today they did not. He has not sexually assaulted anybody, certainly hasn't sex trafficked anybody, and the jury found that today.
And do remember, this can carry on into any sort of civil actions on the part of Jane. I mean, Cassie got her money. She's well and truly clear here. 35 million. Oh man, she set herself for life with that. But again, she endured a lot of domestic abuse, so some would say well warranted in receiving said monies. But for the likes of Mia, that may bring about a lawsuit. I believe she did bring a lawsuit. I think she only received Yes, she did bring a lawsuit, but she didn't. She only received about 400,000 for in terms of a settlement, civil action, and 200,000 had to go to the lawyer. So she only received $200,000. So I don't think there's any further action from them, but there may be action from a few of those who did include, including the producer whose name escapes me, who still has a civil action against Diddy, and a few others as well. But not only that, there may be other criminal actions for domestic violence against Diddy on behalf of Mia, on behalf of Cassie Ventura, and a few others. So Diddy's not exactly out of the woods in terms of legal actions. There are still some state actions that he can be involved in. There are also civil actions that he can be involved with. But again, after such a victory, um, they'd be very hard pressed to get any sort of serious win. But again, with the with a lower standard of proof, and that is by the preponderance of the evidence. Here, they may indeed. I mean, those who are suing him may receive justice, but with regards to beyond reasonable doubt, this case may indeed be precedent so that Diddy can be exonerated for any future charges on the criminal front. Let's continue. Thank you.
Can you tell us what Mr. Combs
I am now going to pass this over to Mr. Steele.
Good evening. Good evening. I want to thank the ladies and gentlemen to my right and my left. There is not a better group of honest and ethical, hardworking, and zealous lawyers, and I especially wish to thank Mark and Tenny for allowing me and everyone else to come together. On behalf of my family, myself, I wish to thank you all for being here and writing truthfully about a man wrongly charged with most of the crimes, and that we all must remember that allegations are nothing. And I'd like to thank Sean for letting me be here. Thank you all. God bless you.
What did your client want to say when Reese?
Thankfully, in our country, we have a right to a jury trial. And thankfully, Mr. Combs took that right. He actually battled for his freedom, for his innocence. He did it. And a lot of times, people are too afraid to do it. And he did it, and we're so happy that he did. We're proud of him. We are completely honored that he put his faith and his trust in us to fight for him. Today is a major win to show what the system can do. We appreciate and we're so thankful to the jury. Thank you to the court. Thank you, New York. It's been a pleasure being here and fighting in your district. Thank you so much. And listen, We appreciate the media. We do. There was a lot of reporting on the accusations. There was a lot of reporting on the indictment. Please report just as vigorously on the acquittal of these counts, please, because that's also the right thing to do. Thank you.
Excellent point raised there by counsel. Yes, they Diddy was really railroaded in a certain way in this trial. I mean, he was considered a monster. He was considered, um, you know, worse than the mustache man in many occasions. Diddy was he was considered the devil in certain circumstances. Listen. The court of public opinion really want to put Diddy underneath the jail in many capacities and respects. But Diddy, who was entitled to his day in court, took his day in court and won. And but again, let's not kid ourselves. Diddy had the financial wherewithal to fight a case of such magnitude, of such a grandeur, against such a huge machine like the U.S. Attorney's Office, with what you can say is Dream Team 2 of lawyers here uh, fought their darndest and really crafted an absolutely fabulous case against in defense of their client, Mr. Sean P. Diddy Combs. And again, it remains to be seen that the public will be so kind to Diddy as much as they vilified him for under when he was under the said charges. And many considered that Diddy would get a lot of jail time for this, but again, the likes of Ms. Garagos, the likes of Mr. Agnifico, uh, really saw through that and said, you know what, we didn't need to call any character witness, any expert witnesses. We know that many of these relationships that were tried here were consensual, and Diddy was not guilty of said crimes, and so he wasn't for sex trafficking and for the RICO charge of racketeering.
Oh, sure. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. So, first of all, I want to thank this wonderful team behind me. I am so happy that they allowed me to join it. I would like to say that I've done a lot of trials, but this is probably the most special one to me. And most
special because he knows his hourly rate, his job, and I do way up. Before he's charged $500 an hour, he can charge $750 an hour.
It's important. I want everyone to know the job is not done yet. We're not finished. The job is not done yet. And so I want to, again, thank Mark, Tanny, and the rest of these wonderful lawyers behind us. They did a fantastic job. And like those before me have said, our system, the jury system, is important. We need good people to serve on juries. We need good people to come and say a person is not guilty. Take that courage to do that. It's okay. We want you to serve on juries. This particular jury was a special jury. It was fantastic. It listened. It paid attention. It put the nonsense to the side. It put the distraction to the side and came to a lawfully good, just conclusion. Juries are important. Juries are important. But more important than that, I think, is people wanting to be on juries. So for all of you all listening, for all you out there in the public, please accept the call, become a juror, and do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
It is such a privilege to be a part of this legal team, this amazing legal team, and to represent Sean Combs. And this is a reminder to everyone, I hope, about the flaws in the criminal justice system, and for everyone to take a second look when the government charges people with crimes, and especially when the Southern District of New York does here. And so I hope everyone takes that seriously. And we take this as an enormous victory and win. This is a huge win. He was acquitted of sex trafficking, acquitted of RICO conspiracy, and he will be able to sleep well at night knowing that. Okay, thank you to everyone.
And listen, this is a win for, I want to say, black men of power. I'll say it. Black men of power. Usually, especially for those who are charged with said offenses, they're usually railroaded and considered innocent until proven guilty. I mean, guilty and proven innocent. And that wasn't the case here. Diddy, to his credit, decided to try this case. And it is for all of us black men in the world. If you see injustice, fight against it. And also, if you are falsely accused of any sort of crime, fight against that too, because you are allowed that day in court. Now, you may not have this sort of defense team that you may have here, but it is important that you have your day in court. It's important that you uh, represent yourself as robustly as possible against said accusations, and really have your day in court to the best of your ability. And it's another reminder that you know the sword of Damocles is dangling over us, and it's up to us to exonerate ourselves, prove ourselves, and make better of ourselves when given the opportunity. Let's continue.
I appreciate you.
What do you think about the bail decision?
Jason.
Guys, can any of you
Jason,
share what
Jason,
Mr.
you're
Combs
awesome. Awesome. Get up there.
Well, I want to start just by thanking my family and the families of each of the lawyers here for giving us the space and the time to serve Sean and to fight for Sean. I want to thank the court for giving us a fair fight. And you see what happens when you have a good defense team come together in front of a court that gives the defense team a fair fight. And finally, I just want to thank Sean for giving me the honor and the privilege of serving him. Thank you.
I'm not going to talk about the bail decision because it's still a pending unresolved matter. And I don't think we're going to take any more questions. I want to thank you all. You guys have been so diligent and dedicated. I pass you guys in the rain. I walk by you in the sun, and you're all out here every day. And I just want to thank you. But I don't think we're going to take any questions.
Can you take us through the ups and downs of the day, though? Because Mr. Combs got acquittals on the major charges. Maybe thought he could go home tonight, and then was told he couldn't.
So a lot of these things are still in process. I mean, the one thing I'm going to leave you with this: we are not nearly done fighting. We are just getting started. To win this and to defeat the prosecutors from the Southern District of New York takes effort from beginning to end. Today was a major step in the right direction, but we fight on, and we're going to win, and we're not going to stop until he walks out of prison a free man to his family. Thank you all for coming.
So again, another hint there by Mr. Agnifico. He is still fighting so that Diddy can be released on bail. This fight is not over yet. It still goes on, even though the verdict of the judge. The decision of the judge today was to hold him on bail. But again, I think his defense team will fight on to. So it's not over yet. This defense team will fight on to see if they can release Diddy until his day of sentencing. So that is not done yet. But for the moment, Diddy is indeed in custody because they consider him a risk to the public, and especially to those who were part of the conviction against him. So let's move on here. Let's get into our good friends here behind the bar at TMZ. Again, these guys, they did what? Let me say that. Beckerman and Kaufman did wonderful work here on the Diddy trial. Let me say this about these guys here. These guys thought that Diddy was going away for years on years. They never gave him a chance. They considered him dead to rights to receive an exorbitant sentence, and to that they were wrong. So we have to listen. Give them credit for the coverage of this trial, but I don't give them credit for is giving Diddy a fair shake. I think they believe that Diddy was was dead to rights, ready, ready for a long period behind bars, and for lack of a better word, he beat Case. And for the likes of Beckerman and Coleman, they did wonderful in terms of coverage of trial. Well, listen, they have egg on their face because they believed that Diddy was going away for a while, as did most people, but more so here behind the bars. So let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen, behind the bar, and let's hear how they react to this verdict and to the decision not to release Diddy on bond until his sentencing.
Behind the bar, July 2nd, 2025. Holy shit.
We got our verdict.
We did not see it coming. You and I had predictions. We were wrong, dead wrong. Yes. Sean Diddy Combs was found guilty of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution involving ex-girlfriends Cassie Ventura and the woman going by the name Jane. He was acquitted of the 3 most serious charges, racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, which carried the potential for life sentence.
That's off the table now.
Off the table, cannot be retried.
He will not spend his life behind bars.
Talk to us, Derek. We know what the jury said. What do you make of it all?
Yeah, this was a jaw-dropping moment. I mean, we all crowded around as this verdict was read. This was the moment of anticipation. I just want to, where we were yesterday is a very different place than where we landed. Remember, yesterday the jury said, we've got a verdict on 2 through 5. And you and I discussed this, and we thought, well, those sound like they're leaning towards guilt, and they're just hung up on RICO. They said, we haven't reached a verdict on count 1, which was the RICO conspiracy. It seemed as if that there was maybe a holdout in favor of not guilty, and that it just took a little bit more time to convince that person to flip to guilty or leave that charge as a mistrial, a hung jury. But instead, it turns out that they found him not guilty. Maybe that room was filled with people who were all convinced that he was not guilty of these serious charges, the sex trafficking, and the RICO. They just needed to get 1 more person on board, or maybe 2 more people on board to say not guilty there. And then the Mann Act, we always thought was a slam dunk. That was the most obvious one, and that did come out the way we expected.
Yeah, it sure did. I mean, the Mann Act it's the only elements for a Mann Act claim are that you solicited somebody for the purposes of prostitution, of illegal sex, and you did so by bringing them across state lines. You need that state lines element in order to make it a federal crime in our system. Otherwise, if it's within state lines,
it's punishable.
A state prostitution claim.
That's right. And it is punishable by up to 10 years. There are 2 counts he was found guilty on. You could imagine, because they are very separate counts. One is with respect to all the prostitutes he brought in when he was with Cassie, and the other is for all the prostitutes who were brought in when he was with Jane. You can imagine them sentencing him consecutively. All that means is up to 10 years on each count. That would be a total of 20 years. In most cases, you hear that sentences run concurrently, and what that means is you stack them on top of each other, and he would only have 10 years and 10 years, but they'd be served at the same time, so just 10 years total.
Yeah.
What do you think is going to happen here? You and I have debated this a little bit. The jury has spoken, and they have spoken very powerfully.
And the judge has to listen to what the jury said. The judge cannot say, well, I personally think he was guilty, therefore I'm going to enhance it. The judge has got to just play it by as if what the jury said is true.
And he's supposed to. I mean, he is a human at the end of the day. He has developed, I'm sure, feelings of his own, but he should act, and he does have some latitude. He is a person who may now act in the sentencing phase of this trial with a bit of discretion. He has up to 20 years to play with. Now, it would be odd to get 20 years on just the Mann Act, unless he was trying to really stick it to him.
He did it twice. There were apparently, according to the prosecutors filed a document today, there were 7 men who were transported across state lines for the purpose of prostitution. So there are 2 victims, but really you're not talking about the victims in this case.
Right.
You're talking about the 7 men who were transported, but still it's only 10 years per count. But he is a first-time offender. Now, it cuts 2 ways. He's a first-time offender, meaning the first time he's been convicted of this. But at the same time, it happened over a number of years.
Yes.
So I think the judge will weigh that. Typically a first-time offender is going to get a far lesser sentence. But in this case, he'd done it over so many years with so many different people. Maybe you lose the benefit of that.
Yeah, this wasn't one tripwire where he had one freak off and a prostitute was ordered. This happened over a long period of time, and the judge will take that into account. It would be odd. He's already served about 10 months just being in prison during the pendency of this trial. He will get credit for that. That's time served, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's the way it should work. He was convicted, so if he gets 20 years, he'll only have to serve 19, and so
forth. But he's never going to get 20 years. Prosecutors in their document today told the judge that at a minimum, he should get 41 to 53 months. That is roughly 3.5 years to 4+ years, 4 years and 5 months, I guess, minus the 10 months he's already served. Right. So if the judge takes the lower end of that recommendation, you're talking about in a couple of years, 2-3 years, he could be out.
Yeah, so that is certain.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as standing here and Talk Live, yeah, a couple of years, because again, this is for lack of a better word, this is a crime of morality than a crime than a victim crime. So therefore, it's not as if Cassie was hurt by using prostitutes. It was not as if Jane was hurt by using prostitutes. It's not as if Diddy was hurt by using prostitutes. This is really a victimless crime. This is not a victim crime. This is more a morality crime. That's the reason why the Mann Act was brought in force in the first place, in order to keep morality within American society. So therefore, this was considered really a slap on the wrist sort of case. So therefore, if he gets 2 3 years, yeah, absolutely he gets 2 to 3 years, because prostitution, though illegal for a lack of a better word, is still used by many people and many guys in terms of escorts and in terms of different things. It is not seen as really a serious crime as it was when it was first enacted, the Mann Act. So therefore, 2 to 3 years, yeah, not out of the question, because again, this is Diddy. Even though he's done this over a certain amount of years, as stated here by Beckerman and Kaufman, the fact of the matter is it was the first conviction of said crime, no matter how long the case. So again, to be fair, he's right. It'll go from 2 to 5 years, and if he takes a lower end, he could be, it could be in jail for a couple of years with time served. It could be maybe, if not a year, in jail, and then he's back out, because this is not a victim crime. This is more a morality crime. Let's continue.
Now,
on the table,
prosecution did say there's all these reasons to enhance upward from that sentence and get him up into the 6-8 years. But I think that's the most of what you're talking about here, 6-8 years.
Yeah, look, the prosecution, this is a devastatingly embarrassing thing to have happened to the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. This is a storied office. Of all the U.S. attorneys, big ones come out of there. Rudy Giuliani has come out of there. James Comey has come out of there. They prosecute the biggest cases. They have some of the smartest lawyers on the planet, and they thought they had this case locked. They thought they had him on RICO and sex trafficking, or they wouldn't have charged him. They file cases that they expect to win. That is how this office operates, and this is a monumental loss. It really is, because to just get the Mann Act convictions, you didn't need the Southern District of New York prosecutors to do that. That was an easy case. So I think they are licking their wounds. Now, where do they go from here? So the first thing we need to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, before they go from here, remember, the prosecution office, the prosecutors were made up of 6 white women. Do remember that. Now, again, I'm sure they're fine lawyers in and of itself, but for them to take this L, this is a huge loss in terms of, well, again, if you believe the math here, not exactly the best of not exactly the best of days for womanhood everywhere, because again, I think if Diddy was convicted of the RICO case, believe me, women, these 6 women who helped prosecute Diddy, they would have been shouted to the rooftops again. And when I say that this is a loss for the Me Too movement, I do mean it, because again, these 6 women from the U.S. Attorney's Office were totally in charge of running the case by Diddy. I mean, in terms of the rank and file, in terms of questions and such. I mean, yes, I believe there's a black lawyer who's in charge of things, but in terms of running the case, in terms of bringing the case to bear in public, and really engineering any sort of prosecution that Diddy, was with these 6 ladies. And believe me, they really tried to convict Diddy on all charges. However, they didn't run a very good case, and they didn't bring a lot of very good witnesses. And I said it from the start, and I said it while they were brought here. A lot of holes were punched, and that bridge and that wall they were trying to build was very faulty in and of itself. But again, that's a bit of uh, wordplay there to explain that in terms of building and construction and such. And women not being in said industries. But anyways, we're talking about the law here. But just having a little fun there, for lack of a better word. But yeah, as stated by Beckerman and Coffin, this is a huge loss for the U.S. Attorney's Office, who have a 98% conviction rate. So for them to not get Diddy on RICO and sex trafficking is a huge loss. It is and that's the reason why you didn't hear much from said office today, especially in terms of a press conference. They didn't want to have to deal with that. I mean, the only victory they had today was keeping Diddy, in jail until the sentencing date. But for them to only get a prostitution charge, huge loss for the U.S. Attorney's Office for those 6 women. Let's continue.
Is Diddy now just free to walk out? Not quite yet. So as we are recording this, his lawyer, Mark Agnifilo, said, okay, here's the verdict. All he got a conviction is on the Mann Act, which is transporting prostitutes. That's not a serious offense. Therefore, he should be released until his sentencing hearing. Send him back to Miami to live in his home on Star Island, because he's obviously not the dangerous racketeer and sex trafficker that they've accused him of.
Yeah.
Where does that stand? So the judge is going to rule on this. They've both submitted briefs. We'll lay out the arguments a little bit. What does the prosecution say about that?
So the prosecution says, look, first of all, under the letter of the law, and we can't really explain this, but it doesn't matter if we can explain it. It's the
Okay, before they go through their machinations as to why they would not release Diddy on bail until sentencing, which indeed did happen. Um, it must be it must be said that we're just gonna let these guys go through the machinations of what went into the decision for said jury and I mean for the judge in terms of Diddy not being released for on bond until his sentencing. And quite simply, it came down to Diddy really not uh, Diddy being a violent man, Diddy being a dangerous man if out in public, and this is what's going on in the mind of the public because again, Diddy was involved in some domestic violent disputes, and he did have a violent and he was prone to violence while outside and running his companies and doing what he does. And so, until his conviction is done, they saw him as being a risk to the public, and so they kept him in jail. So again, let's move forward a little bit here because again, I think um, with said decision already made, I think that would be seen as redundant. Let's continue here.
in a certain way. I think the judge has enough to hang his hat on to keep him in prison, in jail, pending the sentencing, and to uptick the sentence as well. I think there's enough there. I think the judge wants to play it by the book. I think there's also enough for him to say, you know what, I'm going to let him out because I don't really consider him a danger. I mean,
and he has to play it sort of well because
the judge has got to take note of that. It was consensual acts of prostitution. I'm not saying he should go free, but prostitution, it's just, am I wrong to say it's just not that big of a deal anymore?
Yeah, look, I think he will.
There it is. As I said to you on Talk Live here, I mean, yeah, prostitution's really a morality crime, not so much a crime of victims, a crime of passion, or any sort of serious crime as it once was. Because again, the escort industry still runs very very strong to these days. Again, and the sex industry is widely accessible these days, and so prostitution is not really that serious a crime. And in many countries, including Canada to a certain extent, but in many countries in Europe, prostitution is seen as legal. So, with that in mind, it's not seen as a serious crime. It's seen as more a morality charge against anyone participating in said acts, because some would see them as deviants, but others see them as freaky. Let's continue.
want to respect the jury's findings. His role in sentencing Diddy is to sentence him for what the jury found.
Yes.
And the jury only found that he transported prostitutes across state lines.
For
all
consensual
the other stuff,
sexual acts.
That's right. But I do think in the mind of the judge, at least with respect to releasing him pending his sentencing, is the overall dangerousness with which they've established that Diddy is a person who presents a danger to the community. I think on the releasing him pending sentencing, it's pretty clear that he still poses a risk. But you're right, on the absolute sentence, I don't think you can really throw the book at him unless your bias will be showing if you do that. And your bias will be like, you are clearly taking into account things that they didn't convict him for, and that is ultimately not fair. Here's my other question, which got me thinking. You're right, he's only been convicted. I always said federal case was an awkward fit. I thought they had enough. I thought they should have convicted him, but it did seem awkward. Yeah. Are there any offenses, given the testimony and how little Diddy did to sort of run from the domestic violence? He did nothing.
Yes.
He even in his closing argument, they said Diddy is a man who has committed domestic abuse, but that's not what he's on trial for. If there's anything available, will a state prosecutor look at the case and say, we got to get some pound of flesh? This guy basically admitted to beating women, and they got nothing.
I can see it. I mean, you have to rely on New York. Or I think that's where we really have the evidence. The video was,
or Florida, where she said she was. I think.
Yeah, but then you're just relying on one person's testimony. I don't know. You know, I really think it's the Intercontinental video. It's Cassie. Does Cassie want to testify again?
I don't know if Jane's testimony was. We don't know, but was Jane?
I'll tell you. Probably not going to hear from Cassie with regards to domestic violence. She has her pound of flesh, and that's $35 million. That's her pound of flesh. She is good getting the money. If she really was aggrieved, she would have filed a criminal charge. She didn't do that. She filed a civil one because she wanted to be compensated for her time with Diddy, with domestic violence, be it in the Intercontinental Hotel or elsewhere, as testified throughout this trial. So I really don't see anything coming from Cassie's part. Who I may see it come from is Mia. Mia is not exactly well pleased with Diddy in the fact that in her domestic disputes, they may try. She may try to launch a criminal action against Diddy for any sort, because she already received her civil action. She already received $400,000, but she may launch a criminal action against Diddy. But I think, for the most part, if anybody is going to be launching anything against Diddy, it would be on a civil action where the standard of proof is lower, and they could get their little pound of flesh. Because at the end of the day, instead of Diddy being in jail, what they would like more is money. And I think Cassie is well and truly good. Her receiving $35 million so that her and her PT instructor husband Alex Fine can go on with their life and live happily ever after with that $35 million. So I really don't see any sort of criminal actions or criminal activities from Cassie or from Jane Doe, because she really wanted to be in a relationship with Diddy. She loved being in a transactional relationship with Diddy. If anybody, it's going to be Mia, but for the most part, it will be civil actions. Let's continue.
Testimony rejected as to the violence she says she endured, or rejected as to the force into freak-off?
All we know is the force.
We just don't know. Exactly. Yeah. They said this was a transactional consensual relationship, but they didn't say that Diddy didn't beat her.
Yeah, I think it might be a fool's errand to go after him at this point. He feels so emboldened. I don't know. I mean, it depends what facts are there. You have statute of limitations problems all over the place. It's really tough. Derek, do you think if this is
let's go to some questions.
Will be me for Eva
forever.
Come
on, lame-o.
Sorry. Do you think if Diddy's trial was in a different state, he would be found guilty on all charges? I don't think so. New York's a pretty liberal state. I don't think it's any different anywhere else.
Yeah, I consider federal trials roughly the same in all areas. Are people more cosmopolitan in the New York jury pool? I remember Jamie Schramm, our news director, said this. I don't think that's what factored in.
A lot of pervs in New York?
Yeah, he's like, hey, they're pretty worldly, so they know what a group sex looks like. I don't think that's what went on here. I just don't think they believed that these relationships were the product of force. I think they really hung a lot on Cassie's text where she said, I'm down for a freak off whenever.
And then Jane. And then Jane is still with him.
Jane's still living in an apartment that he pays for. I think they took that.
That is absolutely absolutely true. And when taking all that into account, that's part of the reason why Diddy was freed from the sex trafficking and the RICO charges. Because, and especially Jane's testimony hurt the emphasis of Cassie's testimony earlier on in the trial. Without question. She is still living off the affairs of Diddy. She still wants a relationship with Diddy. To this day, she was only subpoenaed to testify on behalf of the prosecution. That was a fatal mistake. They should have brought a Christine Coram to trial, put her under oath, see what they could have got from her. But there were a lot of holes in a lot of these testimonies, and they really didn't need to bring Jane Doe into this action because even though she formed a solid case because she willingly participated in the free calls, heard Cassie's testimony, and is still living off the avails of Diddy to this day, and still wants a relationship with Diddy, ladies and gentlemen. That's the truth. Let's continue.
That into account.
Yeah.
Seashells Prosperity says, how much do you think the bail will be? So Diddy's team has proposed $1 million bond. They have said, $1 million bond, my mom will co-sign, other relatives will co-sign. I'll only go between California, New York, and Florida. I'll surrender my passport. You can drug test me. So that's what he's proposed. They're going to be no less than that.
The judge might make it $10 million, but at the end of the day, the money is not.
Maybe put an ankle monitor on him.
Yeah,
something.
he'll for sure have that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to stop it there, ladies and gentlemen, because at the end of the day, it's redundant. Diddy is a lot of these questions because Diddy was indeed kept in custody until his sentencing hearing. So he'll be there for another 3 months until his sentencing in October, ladies and gentlemen. The sentencing of Diddy will happen in October, so they have another 3 months in jail, which is considered time served, and that can go against his sentence. So he would have served, I would say, near, if not a full year, against his sentence. So again, his sentence would be reduced by 1 year by simply having his time served. So if he's there for 2 or 3 years by good behavior, he could be out within a year, ladies and gentlemen, if given to the prostitution charge. Let's move on here to another segment of the Diddy trial, and let's hear from Harvey Levin himself because he was absolutely livid at the job done by the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was really gunning for a victory on behalf of the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he saw Diddy's lack of conviction on sex trafficking and on the RICO charge as being a failure, a straight failure. And as we see here, the winners and losers video by TMZ here, and listen, Harvey's going to set you straight. Let's get into this.
Today was a monumental loss for prosecutors in the Diddy case. I wish there were a bigger word than the word losers, because that's what they are. This case would never have been brought if the only issues were whether he transported a sex worker across state lines to have sex. There is no way they would have done it. I mean, you look at this case, and they had.
Very good point raised there by Harvey. Just to bring it back, yeah. I mean, if it was just based on prostitution, there would be no case. The only reason why they added the prosecution charge is simply because it added to their chances of convicting Diddy because of the fact that it was, there for all to be seen, and they could get a conviction of him. So if they missed out on the RICO and the sex trafficking charge, at least they'll get him on the prostitution charge, on the Mann Act charges. So at least he'll get something. So imagine if they didn't have that prostitution charge there. Diddy would be a free man to this day, and that would have been an even bigger loss. And I do mean a bigger loss for the U.S. Attorney's Office, who has a 98% conviction rate. This was an absolute shocker, to be fair. And Harvey Levin put it simply plain.
70 Homeland Security agents at Diddy's homes in Miami and LA. And they spent a fortune putting this case together. And what did they get? A not guilty verdict on racketeering, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Cassie, a not guilty verdict on sex trafficking as it relates to Jane. Those were the reasons why this case was brought. They said he was a racketeer. The jury said no. They said that he was raping Cassie and coercing Cassie and Jane and forcing them into these freak-offs. The jury didn't buy it. Now, again, I wasn't in the courtroom, nor were you. I mean, you got to see the witnesses, see the evidence. And the jury not only was not buying it, but now that we look at it, remember, an hour into this case, an hour into deliberations, the jury came back to the judge and said one of the jurors, juror 25, was not following jury instructions. What really stunned me about that is that it's almost like he was the holdout and everybody else felt one way, he felt another way. And they did that within an hour. And he obviously came around, it seems. And this didn't seem a difficult decision for the jury. It seems like they were pretty much in agreement on the first straw vote.
Do remember, ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 women on this jury, on this jury. 4 women, 8 men. All, most if not all these people. The only one who was objecting, they had this decision within the hour. The only one who really objected was one man who literally said, "No, we need to hear, we need to hear more evidence. I'm not truly satisfied with the fact that Diddy was not guilty." They knew at the hour that Diddy was not guilty, ladies and gentlemen. They knew at the hour that he wasn't guilty. They only deliberated for a little more time just to be sure, just to bring this guy around to set charges, just to bring this guy around to their side of the verdict. No, so it wasn't. It to Harvey's surprise and to many others, Diddy's conviction was a shock simply because they came to the conclusion well before time, and this was done without expert witnesses, without character witness testimony, ladies and gentlemen. They rested. The defense rested. It is implausible to see a defense counsel rest without its own set of witnesses to exonerate the defendant from any sort of conviction, ladies and gentlemen. It is stunning. They said to themselves, you know what? We have enough here. We have enough. We have enough circumstantial evidence. We have enough text messages. We have enough emails. We have enough to exonerate our client without having to bring anyone in ourselves. That is the level of swing and miss, the level of defeat that this U.S. Attorney's Office suffered today. They didn't even have a witness to go against these guys. That's how bad it got. That's how bad it got. When you didn't need any witnesses on your on behalf of your defendant to literally fight a case against one of the biggest prosecuting offices, if in the United States, if not the world, there's a problem. And heads will
So, did the prosecution prove its case? No. Yes, he was found guilty on the Mann Act, 2 counts. But again, this is an antiquated law. Let me just explain the Mann Act. That if Diddy had taken somebody from the San Fernando Valley, a sex worker, and then brought them over the hill to a hotel in Beverly Hills and paid them, well, that would be solicitation of prostitution. Guess what? It wouldn't even be a felony case. The DA wouldn't take a case like that. It'd be a misdemeanor case that the city attorney might file. Generally, they don't. But if they do, it's 6 months, maximum a year in county jail, which they never give. And yet, we are now looking at a prosecution that got 2 convictions of putting a sex worker on an airplane and flying to where Diddy was. That's what this case ended up to be. A huge, a monumental loss for prosecutors.
He said it all right there. That leads you to think about the sort of sentence Diddy will receive. It will be a slap in the wrist. Literally a slap in the wrist. He's already been in jail for a year. He doubts that Diddy will be there for another year. It's a misdemeanor on its own, ladies and gentlemen. This is a federal crime, and he was over state lines. Okay, there may be a bit more seriousness to it, since it is a 10-year offense. But there was no sex trafficking, and there was no RICO conspiracy. There was no racketeering here, so he'll receive a very light sentence. He will not receive 10 years for this crime. He'll receive 2 to 5, if that. And I would venture more to the 2 than the 5. That's what he's going to receive. Because as Harvey said, this is an antiquated law. This is a law that not many people observe, and not even a DA would take. A district attorney wouldn't take this case because it's not worth the paper is printed on. That is the level of defeat that this U.S. Attorney's Office is suffering right now. They got they got Diddy on a technicality, a literal technicality.
And I got to say that I want to go back to the news conference the U.S. Attorney had, where the U.S. Attorney spent time talking about baby oil. And when I heard him talking about baby oil, I'm just thinking, what does this have to do with a federal prosecution? Yes, it's salacious, but what does it have to do with 70 Homeland Security agents? Now, look, and I'm not saying Cassie wasn't abused. We know she was abused. We saw the Intercontinental Hotel video, but he wasn't being prosecuted for that. And to say, and I have talked about this from the beginning, to say this dude was a racketeer, he's a bad guy, and I think a criminal. He's committed a lot of crimes along the way. But a racketeer? And again, I will say this one more time. A racketeer is somebody in organized crime. This was disorganized crime. This was a jealous, crazy, even criminal boyfriend who is so crazed that burglarize Kid Cudi's house or maybe blow up the car and kidnap somebody and give them a lie detector test. But there's no enterprise. It's not Bad Boy Records. That's not what Bad Boy Records was doing. It was a crazed boyfriend who was doing this. That's not organized crime. And clearly, the jury saw that.
Very good points raised there by Harvey there. This is not organized crime. This was a crazy boyfriend. That's what Sean P. Diddy Combs is. A crazy boyfriend, yes. Prone to violence, prone to certain acts of criminal activity, yes, understood, but he's not part of a criminal organization. He's used legitimate arms of his businesses to allow for his predilections to be, for his sexual predilections to be continued and to be realized, and also to allow for his, his pawn show for sex, number one, and number two, allow for Cassie and for Jane Doe to stay close to him. Simple as that, and allowed for him to exact revenge on his enemies, who he saw were indeed his girlfriends. That's all he was. That's all he did. And the fact that the Homeland Security went en masse in force to barge into Diddy's home, guns drawn, have his kids face down in their gardens at Star Island, while they search ransacked Diddy's residence in order to find tapes of any sort of criminality, to find baby oil, in order for Diddy to, in order to seek a conviction against Diddy, is a travesty of, it's a terrible use of taxpayer dollars to lock up a black man. If this was any other person, such force would not. I kid you. It was not a criminal. It was a crime. Yes, he involved himself in criminal activity, but he wasn't charged for it. This is why I say it's a victory for black people, because he was allowed to stand trial and exonerate himself when many wouldn't, especially when the biggest arms of the U.S. federal government were used in order to try to convict him. That was a shame, because he should have seen a better course of action, a better amount of treatment from said arms, that is the FBI, the HSI, and other
And they came back unanimously on it. So, what do we end up with? We end up with a case that, if it was all within one state, would have been maximum a misdemeanor in the city attorney's office. Just think about that. So, now the question, what was really behind this? Maybe the prosecutors really believed in their case. But I question that news conference where, they decided it's not just that we're going to file a case against him. We're going to have a whole big news conference laying out all the evidence, talking about the salacious things like baby oil and Astroglide and whatnot. And then you got to wonder, was their motivation to seek justice, or was this, at least in part, a publicity grab? And I say that because I don't get, A, why they held a news conference, and B, why they're bringing in things like baby oil. I want to say one other thing, that, the jury saw the freak-off videos, and a lot of people thought, oh, that's going to hurt Diddy. I think it's the opposite, because that video doesn't get in the head of Cassie or Jane. They just see them having sex. And, between looking at the video, looking at those text messages saying, when are we going to have the next freak off? I love these freak offs. It's possible for sure that there were times when they didn't, but the jury wasn't buying that he coerced them. They just weren't buying it, because it's complicated when they're in long relationships with Diddy. So I'm not saying they weren't abused, but the prosecution, to file a case like this, to spend this kind of money, to invest the resources they did, they got to know going in that there's a chance they can prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. It seems this jury had no problem finding him not guilty on the main counts. Now, as for what's going to happen.
Okay, now, just saying. When looking at those sex tapes, you know what they were seeing? And in perpetuity? Consensual sex. Yes, perverted, but consensual. That added with any text messages or emails of consent, consented email, consented text messages from Diddy, between Diddy and Cassie, and Diddy and Jane Doe, or anybody involved in said freak offs. And the verdict became much. No wonder they came to it, because what they were looking at was consensual sex. They were looking at porn, literally. They were literally looking at, oh, Diddy likes it this way, Diddy likes it that way. Oh, okay, fine, I'm surprised they didn't see it on, but they were looking at consensual sex, ladies and gentlemen. That is Diddy walked away because he was part of a legitimate organization in which the ladies who participated had consensual sex with Diddy. The only problem was, indeed, he in certain cases used domestic violence in order to get his way, but he wasn't on trial for said charges. And guess what? These ladies aren't going to step up to the plate and say, "Oh, I want to see Diddy in jail for domestic violence." No, Cassie already has her pound of flesh. She has her money, $35 million, lock, stock, barrel. She ain't coming back from it. She just wants this to go away, and she's happy that she got her. And neither is Jane Doe going to come back with a conviction. The only one I see is Mia. But other than that, consensual sex done, freak offs done. They'll continue, but in a sort of much more careful way. Because believe me, when Diddy gets out of here, he's got a lot of issues in order to a lot of urges he wants to get settled. So that'll happen again. But at the end of the day, he's going to be with consensual people. He's going to be much more careful about it. But at the end of the day, he can't be convicted for it because there were no victims here. That's what the jury was telling the rest of the world. There were no victims here.
Happen to him, whether he's going to get significant prison time, I don't know. I just
No victims on a federal level. Let me say that. No victims on a federal level.
don't think so. Because ultimately, do you put a guy in prison because he hired a sex worker and flew him on an airplane? Do you put him in prison for 10 years? I don't think so. Do you put him in prison for 5 years? I don't think so. Now, you could say, well, we're going to put him in prison because he's just a bad guy. But that's not what the law says. The law doesn't say you can look at a guy and say, he's.
And that's not what the jury said. The jury didn't see Diddy as a bad guy. Remember that. This verdict, the jury's literally saying that Diddy's not a bad guy. He may be perverted. He may have flights of domestic violence and anger and vendetta. But he's not a bad guy. He's not. He can't. We can't. There's nothing there that we can truly convict him of in terms of RICO, in terms of sex trafficking. He's not that sort of guy. Blow to the Me Too movement. Let's continue.
Just a bad guy, so we're going to throw the book at him. That's wrong. That's wrong. They did that with O.J. Simpson in that kidnapping case in Las Vegas. And even though I covered the O.J. Simpson murder cases, the civil and criminal, and knew he was guilty, the kidnapping case was BS. And yet, the judge threw the book at him as a pound of flesh because he was found not guilty in the murder case. That wasn't fair. That wasn't right. And you can't look at the guy and say, I just dislike him so much that I'm going to do what I might not do if he were a different guy. You got to apply the law fairly. And I just don't see him getting significant prison time. I may be wrong, but this Mann Act is an antiquated law. It was used for racial purposes initially. And it's no different from.
Wow. I forgot about that. Yeah, indeed. I think it was the back Jack Johnson. That's right, for Jack Johnson, because Jack, well, he had a penchant for prostitutes, but more often than not, it was for white prostitutes. And he would hire. And a few of the big ones there. This could be true. Just speculating. Not spitballing here, but I believe that was the reason why the Mann Act was enacted for Jack Johnson and his use of white prostitutes to satisfy his sexual urges. So yes, it is an antiquated law. You're absolutely right. It was for racial purposes. It's still on the books, and that's the reason why he was convicted. Funny that another black man convicted for kidnapping.
you know, going after a John on Hollywood Boulevard, you know, which is a misdemeanor case. It's transporting a sex worker. So I just don't see significant time here. Bottom line here, the prosecution may have convicted him on the Mann Act, but they lost this case in a spectacular way.
Well said there by Mr. Harvey Levin, head of TMZ. Yeah, he really did not. Um, he did not. Let me see. Go to the Mann Act here. I just want to see what the Mann Act is here, ladies and gentlemen. Yes. The Mann Act. White Slave Traffic Act. Here we go. Yes, indeed. Let's go with this Informational Institute. The Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act, a federal law that criminalizes the transportation of any woman or girl for the purpose of prostitution or debauchery or for a moral purpose. The Mann Act passed in June 1910 and named after Illinois Congressman James Mann, invoked the Commerce Clause to felonize the use of interstate or foreign commerce to transport women for immoral purposes. The act was aimed at prostitution, immorality, and human trafficking. Congress appointed a commission in 1907 to investigate the problem of immigrant prostitutes. Okay. It was alleged that immigrant women were brought to the United States for sexual slavery, and immigrant men lured American girls into prostitution. White slave. There we go. The committees believed that no girl went into the prostitution unless or held captive. This led to the public outrage, which eventually resulted in enactment of the Mann Act. However, many critics note that the act ended up criminalizing many acts of consensual sex activity and had racial undertones. The phrase immoral purpose was broadly used to prosecute unlawful premarital, extramarital, and interracial relationships through Caminetti v. United States, 1917, when the United States Supreme Court held that illicit fornication event when consensual constituted as immoral purpose. It didn't matter if the woman consented, the man would be liable irrespectively, as is found here. Um, Furthermore, if the woman consented, she could be held as an accessory to the crime. Hmm. Funny that. While the act was never repealed, it was amended a few times, the most notable of which were listed in 78 to address issues of child pornography, 6 to address the issues against consensual sex by replacing the phrase any with any sexual activity for which the person can be charged with a criminal offense. So, I'm just thinking, Mann Act, Jack Johnson. Sorry. Yes, there it is. Mann Act, Jack Johnson. The Mann Act. Okay, here it is. I knew it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm on this one. The Mann Act, known as the White Slave Act, was a U.S. law enacted in 1910 and prohibited the transportation of women across state lines for immoral purposes, which was often interpreted as prostitution or other sexual exploitation. According to the National Archives and PBS, the law was used in the case of Jack Johnson. I was on the one here. The first African American heavyweight boxing champion who was convicted in 1913 for violating the Mann Act for transporting a white woman, Belle Shriver, across state lines. While the official charge was related to transporting a known prostitute, the conviction was widely seen as motivated by racial prejudice and resentment over the successful relationships with white women, as highlighted by PBS and the National Museum of African American History. There it is. The Mann Act in action, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just move out of the way so you can see it for yourself. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It was used against Jack Johnson, the Mann Act. I was right. Uh, I remember seeing a. Let me see if I can get this here. There it is. There it is, ladies and gentlemen. There's the Mann Act. And when it was used indeed for Jack Johnson. was on the one this time. Yep, indeed. And that's the reason because uh, they disapproved of his interracial relationship with Belle Shriver. That. So that's why I say it was when Harvey said it was a racial use. Here again, another racial use. The Mann Act is being used against Sean P. Diddy Combs. You get it? Okay. Fantastic, ladies and gentlemen. All right. So let's get into again. Thanks you very much to TMZ, Harvey Levin, Beckerman, Kaufman, doing wonderful work, especially at Behind the Bar in covering this trial and doing fantastic work in these YouTube streets. Let's just go to one more thing. Yeah, one more thing here, and that is the how the verdict was seen by. Hold on, just that there. Thank you. How the verdict was seen by a few prosecutors here who are following the case, including. Here we go. One. By a few prosecutors that we have here, and they'll be introduced in just a second. Thank you very much for joining us here on Talk Live. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Into the second hour we go. Soon enough. Let's continue.
Talking to throughout the trial about all the testimony. Joe Tacopina, welcome back to TMZ Live.
You called it.
Joe Tacopina was involved, I believe, in the Young Gotti case. I believe so. Yes, I believe he got Young Gotti off of his. He helped him beat case. I believe it's Young. Yeah, Joe Tacopina. Let me just make sure I got this here. Joe Tacopina. Let me just make sure I have this. No, I gotta leave this up. Yes, the man at Joe. Tacopino. Yes, indeed. I believe Joe Tacopino. He yes, 59 years old, and he believe ASAP Rocky's lawyer. There you go. There it is. He was ASAP Rocky's lawyer. Helped ASAP Rocky get off the murder charge, I believe, that was held against him a couple months back, and he was part of the celebration that he and Rihanna had that was so famously documented over the last couple of months. But yes, he was ASAP Rocky's lawyers. I'm sorry, my mistake. But he was ASAP Rocky's lawyers and helped him beat case. Let us get it back to Joe Tacopina and his thoughts on the verdict here on this trial.
You really did.
I mean, exactly. But look, I don't think I need to be a genius to call this. I mean, that was a case that was so over prosecuted. It was really the most expensive prostitution trial in the history of American jurisprudence. That's all it was. Racketeering to me was a joke, a racketeering enterprise. I mean, when we think of racketeering, we think of things like organized crime, drug cartels, vicious gangs were born to commit crimes. I mean, was never a racketeering case. Sex trafficking is a high standard. Sex trafficking, you really need fraud, coercion, force. There was so much evidence of consent in this case that it was impossible for 12 people to believe that sex trafficking happened. That was not sex trafficking. Again, that was some horrific stuff and whatever, but everyone was willing participant at times. So, it was, to me, it was absolutely going to wind up being this way. You have a tough and gritty New York jury who's not going to be blown away by these horrific acts, that video that they played 23 times. It was a prostitute. I always said the Mann Act, he had no defense on. He had no defense on the transportation of prostitution across interstate lines. There was no defense. It's a charge that's never brought, by the way, but he had no defense.
Yeah.
Excellent point raised there by Mr. Tacopina. Yeah, it was the most expensive, as stated, the most expensive prostitution trial in U.S. history, and he's right. He's absolutely right. This. There was not enough. There was too much consensual sex. There's too much consent. There was too much. Well, fornication, mutual fornication on all parties concerned for there to be a conviction against Diddy. They're not going to get him on sex trafficking. They're not going to get him on RICO because he didn't involve himself in a criminal organization. to the shock of us all, but not to the shock of Mr. Tacopina. Yeah, it's and he is uh, a well yeah he's a huge defense attorney in the United States, a man of high repute, and he saw right through this, and any sort of defense attorney would see right through this charge. Again, those who want to see Diddy convicted, they wouldn't see Beckham in the coffin, TMZ behind the bar. However, not Mr. Tacopina here or anyone, any defense attorney worth their salt. Let's continue.
Joe, we never saw. You talked about the videos that they had to watch, the freak off videos, and we don't know what those videos were. We have an idea of what it showed, but do you think that was part of the thing that led to the jury going like, they're consenting? I mean, we watched these videos. You could see Cassie and Jane not only in the videos, but into the activities that were going on in those videos. Again, it's sort of the X factor because we didn't see exactly what they saw.
Well, the triple X factor in this case.
Yeah, exactly. The triple X factor.
But it's true. I mean, they're looking at these videos, and prosecutors showed some, defense showed some, but all of them are Cassie engaging in sex. And the question is, did she look or say anything
that makes you think she was being forced?
And the jury said no.
Right. I mean, not beyond a reasonable doubt anyway, right, guys? And that's the standard. This is not, it's not a lie detector test. This is a reasonable doubt standard. And if you have a doubt that's based on reason, you must acquit. And here, there was so much evidence of consent. I mean, if you looked at the contemporaneous text messages that were elicited by the defense throughout this trial of Cassie and the other one, it was clear that they were consenting, at least at portions of this. So, when is it consensual? When is it not consensual? I mean, this case was, again, I called it from the beginning, not because I'm a fortune teller. I think I called it because the evidence and the charges sort of were pretty clear to me that this was going to wind up being a prostitution conviction. And we spent God knows how many billions of dollars in federal court talking about baby oil, applesauce on hamburgers, the stupidest stuff I've ever heard. Urination, the things that you really don't expect to hear in a federal district court. That was the gist of this testimony. So, look, Diddy was proven to be a bad guy, but this is not the case. This was not the case to bring against him.
Let's talk about who brought the case.
Again, Mrs. Tacopina is absolutely right. This is really a huge dressing down of the U.S. Attorney's Office. They use millions of taxpayer dollars to try to take down a music mogul who they took offense to, and it was a wrong choice of case because there's way too much consent, way too much. It was basically porn. It was basically corn. Sorry, on display for the world to see. I mean, these jurors got about a good dose of corn that would last them at least a few years in this instance. And a lot of these individuals were involved in consensual sex that it's not as if these people were trying to run away. It's not as if these these people, Cassie, Jane Doe, anyone, were playing scared at these instances. They were full participants. They were consented participants. These were swingers en masse. And the fact that Diddy's on trial for this, for indeed the most expensive prostitution case in U.S. history, is a joke. It is a joke. And, the U.S. Attorney's Office needs to be held to account. And a lot of those attorneys need to have a dressing down because they have embarrassed the reputation of the U.S. Attorney's Office, who have a very pristine reputation of many attorneys such as Rudy Giuliani and James Comey came out of those offices and are very once. Very good attorneys to let's continue.
Case against him. So this is the Southern District of New York, and there have been prosecutors who have made their careers off of high-profile prosecutions. James Comey with Martha Stewart, Rudy Giuliani made his career. So you got a prosecutor coming out of the gate with a news conference, U.S. attorney, with a news conference where he's talking about baby oil. And in a way, I think that came back to bite him.
Oh, no doubt. I remember watching Damian Williams, and he's no longer the U.S. attorney, of course. I remember watching his press conference thinking, they're actually talking about baby oil in the press conference as one of the key elements of the offensive conduct here. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm missing something. But we weren't missing anything. It's just this guy was a freak. He was a jealous lunatic boyfriend. He did some things that are not conventional by any stretch. But did they rise to the level of racketeering? Look, even if you accepted the Kid Cudi thing, that was a crazed, jealous boyfriend enacting revenge on someone he thought was messing with his girl. Simple as that.
By the way, I don't think they accepted it, Joe, because had they accepted it, maybe they would have met the technical requirements of racketeering, but they didn't. All they needed was 2 acts, and that would have been one. So I don't think they even accepted that.
You know,
and remember, prostitution can be seen as prostitution can be seen as one of the acts, but again, that's only one act. That's only one predicate act. They needed something else. Sex trafficking, racketeering were the others, and they weren't going to get them. So here we are. Oh, actually, they could have added 2 to 1, but again, prostitution is not seen as a predicate act under RICO. But again, they chose not to convict him on that because it was consensual sex, to be fair. So yes, prostitutes were involved, but were the individuals Cassie Ventura and Jane Doe, who still wants a relationship with Diddy, prostituted? They weren't. So these people were paid. It was a contractual relationship, and they went on their merry way. So again, another reason why no conviction to be held against Sean P. Diddy Combs.
Again, though, Harvey, remember that's the one count that they were all going back and forth on. That was the count where there was some strong, based on the jury notes.
But they were unified ultimately.
Ultimately, they were unified, and you're right. And look, again, a racketeering enterprise. This is not a racketeering enterprise. It never was a racketeering enterprise, no matter what they want to try and paint it as. I mean, he was in a racketeering trial by himself. I mean, like that's the, just think about that. There were no co-defendants, no co-conspirators, no cooperators. I mean, it was just the whole thing was weird. It was not done right, and it was done, as I've said before, I believe to garner publicity for certain individuals, and maybe they wanted to make a name for themselves, but this did not help anyone's career from the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's for sure.
Absolutely correct. No one, those 6 ladies who formed the basis of the prosecution office in this action, yeah, they don't want any part of this trial because they have this scars their CV in no way, shape, or form. I'm sure this wouldn't be included in the CV going forward. This is a huge L, and this is a blemish upon their a lot of those prosecution officers will take it out. But who won't are the defense team. Their reputations shot up immensely after this trial, and no wonder they were smiling because all of their retainers have gone up considerably after this case.
No, does not seem like it.
No. Okay, Joe. Well,
we appreciate it.
You're the fortune teller, Joe, to Tacopina.
Crystal ball, Tacopina.
Now listen, just send my regards if you speak to Nancy Grace and Ashley Banfield later. Please just send my regards.
We're going to talk to Nancy.
Yeah, let me tell you.
I remember Nancy showing me a Tootsie Roll on your show and telling me I didn't know what the jury was thinking and I was wrong. So I just, I don't like to gloat or anything like that. I'm not trying to take a victory.
Hold on, Joe, hold on. I'm going to call you on that. You love to gloat.
I do. I absolutely love to gloat. I do. Especially when the other.
And gloating against Nancy Grace is always great. Let's face facts. This girl is a fire starter of
Well, that was some tough cross-examination there, boy.
You got me, Harvey. You're really good. You are really good. You're really good at cross. You're really good.
Okay, Joe. We really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you,
Thanks a
boys.
lot.
Bye.
Oh, boy. Speaking of Nancy Grace.
Before we close up here, guys, let's move on to another lawyer.
In court. And the other is, how does the client land when the case is over? Will they have a life? Will they have a career? And it's something good lawyers think about when they're involved in the heat of the battle.
Well, someone who knows that probably just as much as any other attorney in the world, Jose Baez, the high-powered defense attorney joining us, who, of course, got Casey Anthony acquitted in her case. So he understands what Diddy's team is going to be going through and Diddy himself. Jose, welcome back to TMZ Live.
Thanks for having me, guys. I apologize for the informal attire, but I thought I'd wear my official TMZ t-shirt.
There you go.
All right.
If Harvey can pull it off, why not at me, right?
There you go. So Jose, I'm so glad we're talking to you because look, you represented Casey Anthony. You got her off on a murder charge, and she has tried to go forward in her life, but everybody still remembers it. Is that going to be the same with Diddy?
I don't think so. I think Diddy's going to be fine. I think he'll bounce back fine. Remember, this is an entertainer who, well, he's not a rapper. He's a rap producer, and he deals in that world where, quite frankly, I don't think it's going to affect him all that much. Now, higher corporate sponsors may shy away from him for a while, but as far as the music business is concerned, I don't think it's going to affect him at all.
Jose, you don't think that there's a chance that, look, I know what you're saying, that that people in the music world may be like, look, if he can make hits, we'll work with him. But those artists do risk some backlash from the public who, not everyone in the public, believe me. I mean, we saw the reactions to the verdict. There were certainly people celebrating, but there are people who are pissed off about this. So that's something that those artists are going to have to weigh whether or not they work with Diddy.
But a lot of what he does is in the background as a producer. So yes, there's going to be somewhat of a hit. However, I do think he'll be able to bounce back and work. I don't think he's going to find himself in a situation where he goes bankrupt because of his inability to find work. I do think he'll be able to recover, not to the extent or not to the extreme of where he was before. But look, I think he's made enough money to last himself for what many people would utilize in 5 lifetimes or 10.
Well, you got to remember too, there are a bunch of civil suits, so he's going to
still got to deal with that. Yeah.
This could further tarnish his image, and I will say that Jose.
Again, Harvey, we're dealing with hip hop music here. We're dealing with urban music, to be fair, where such convictions and beating such convictions actually accentuate than downgrade your career. I say that again. Diddy is part of a music industry where the more cases you beat, the better your career is. And yes, he may not be able to represent certain brands, but the fact of the matter is he could still make a way in the music industry simply through his companies, simply being a silent partner in certain things, simply through acting as the head of Revolt or many of these different companies in which they are still very popular, very popular, very profitable in of itself. So Diddy will be just fine, guaranteed. He will not have to suffer fools gladly for anyone. He'll be in and out of jail, and then he'll be making money by himself. And in 10 years, this could be a forgotten case in which he profits from because all he's been charged with is prostitution. Yes, there'll be civil action, but the verdict in this trial and his exoneration from these charges will only add to the gravitas of Diddy going forward, and bring cases and be able to fight cases of such ilk in different courtrooms. And again, he will have high profile lawyers like this again to fight for his cases. So I really do see Diddy um, being able to dodge a lot of these bullets and save himself a lot of money, especially due to the fact that he can still earn money in and of itself. Let's continue.
When we interviewed Mark Agnifilo months and months ago, he said to me that, what the prosecution has done in this case is they've taken a successful, as he put it, a successful black man and reduced him to a monster. Those were Agnifilo's words. So does that stick? I mean,
and those were Beckerman and Kaufman words, and many other people's words as well. Diddy never should have had such epithets showered on him. But again, being a black man, you're prone to these certain attitudes, these certain ideas, and it's a shame. To be fair,
his own lawyers said it before trial and even during trial. They said what a bad guy he is, essentially. So doesn't that haunt him?
Like I said, this isn't going to be a full recovery, but I do think he'll be able to recover some semblance of a life. But as we mentioned before, I think this prosecution was.
You do remember this guy's the hottest man in the street right now. So Diddy is pretty much untouchable. So to a certain extent, but when he finally beats these charges and it's back out in the public eye, believe me, the amount of street cred he'll gain from this, and the amount of I think residual profits from his lack of conviction here. Uh, it'll allow for Diddy to survive if not thrive in these instances. Let's continue.
Was a flat out racist prosecution. I think they took a man who was at the top of his game. They brought out ugliness. This is what I like to call TV prosecutions. If you notice, if the Cassie video hadn't come out, none of this would be an issue, and he would have never gone to trial. He would have continued on with his lifestyle as he saw fit. But once,
well, I think he would have carried on his lifestyle if he was a little nice to Cassie. I don't think he needed to go through that Intercontinental Hotel thing or many other actions of domestic violence. I think he could have. If he kept Cassie sweet, guaranteed, and I do mean guaranteed, um, their the relationship would have continued, and he would have been able to have his freak offs en masse till perpetuity. Let's continue.
that video came out, you had a domestic violence case and a very popular individual, and they started sniffing around and they created a case. And that's what this whole circus is all about. We shouldn't allow prosecutors, much less federal prosecutors, construct and build a case from absolute nothing, from whole cloth. When I read the indictment in this case, it read like a rap star. And I couldn't figure out, other than the Mann Act charges, which we've discussed on prior occasions. We've always stated those were the charges that
Right.
were going to run, he was going to run into trouble with. That and the stigma that the news media and these prosecutors stuck on him. So, granted, it's going to depend on a lot of how he, one, repairs his public image. I do think if he takes a hiatus, that will benefit him, because we live in a 24-hour news cycle.
Well,
There's going to be another case
the
next
hiatus
week.
is going to be prison.
Yeah, whatever the sentence.
Well,
turns out to be.
that's certainly a strong possibility as well. So, but I do think he'll be able to get out and put somewhat of a life together. And if he doesn't, big deal. He's already made enough money for him to be able to retire and enjoy the rest of his life, and hopefully newfound freedom if he gets out sooner than later.
Absolutely. I really don't think he'll be in jail for a long time, and he will be able to make a living for himself as great as it has been. Maybe not as great as it has been, but he'll make a living that most of us would only dream of.
I don't think these charges, while I do realize they have stiff penalties, I don't think they pose a danger to society. And I think it is an antiquated law. A lot of men who, participate in these types of activities have no idea what the Mann Act is, or have no idea that it's illegal to not only transport a prostitute across state lines, but it's also illegal to cross state lines to engage in prostitution. So, all these guys going to Costa Rica for a fishing trip, they're committing federal crimes. And it's a very...
And again, they would never seek criminal actions against anyone crossing state lines with prostitutes in order to, like Diddy did. Let's face facts. It's not going to happen. It wouldn't happen. And again, this is a misdemeanor crime in most cases, and the escort industry, in and of itself, has gone unfettered by the Mann Act to this day, but only in certain circumstances, such as Diddy's. We all know why.
very antiquated law that I think hopefully this judge, who is a little bit on the younger side, might see that this isn't exactly these aren't exactly the charges that warrant a significant jail or prison term.
Yeah, interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
really,
Jose,
thank you so really much. Appreciate it.
Well, guys, thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Sure, let's go.
All right, we're going to leave it there, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on Talk Live. Thank you to TMZ. Thank you to Nate the lawyer, who's done wonderful work in these YouTube streets after this trial. And also thanks CBS, CBS for also their participation here. But let's just do some summing up here, ladies and gentlemen. Back to the full camera. Ladies and gentlemen, as stated, this is a win for black men. This is a win for men everywhere. This is a slight against the Me Too, but most importantly, this is a huge loss to the U.S. Prosecution Office, which has a pristine record when it comes to these sort of cases. They should have never taken on a case like this. Never. They should have never done it. But seeing as Cassie Ventura received $35 million for Diddy, they decided to pile on, and they decided to make a case out of this from loincloth, as stated by Mr. Baez, by Jose Baez, the defense attorney we just heard before. And it was any defense attorney worth their salt realized that this was a nothing case, and this is something that the U.S. Attorney's Office is going to suffer the repercussions from for a while yet. To use the full brunt of the human of the HSI office, Homeland Security Office, to use different different police outlets in order to seek conviction against John P. Diddy Combs, to use the full force of the U.S. Attorney's Office to try to convict John P. Diddy Combs was a bit of a travesty, to be fair. And they deserve to have their dressing down, for lack of a better word, from many from the legal community. This was not something that they should have sought out in the first place, and for them to only get Diddy on a technicality is a bit of a black eye to the U.S. Attorney's Office in and of itself. So we'll wait. But what remains is the fact that Diddy has not been released from custody as of yet. They're going to keep him there because they see him as a risk to the public due to his flights of violence and domestic violence in that, and that was well documented. So again, they're keeping Diddy in custody until his sentencing hearing, and I don't expect Diddy to get a long time for sentencing. I believe it'll be between 2 to 5 years, airing on 2 years, and with time served, I don't think he'll get more than a year. I don't think he'll get more than a year here. And for those who may not like said things, the fact of the matter is, a lot of what he had to say, a lot of the evidence launched by the U.S. Prosecution Office, especially in terms of the witnesses. And I was saying this from the beginning, a lot of their witnesses were weak, including Jane, including a lot of others as well who participated in this trial. And what the jury was watching was consensual sex between adults. They were watching a lot of porn. For lack of a better word, they were locking a lot of triple X videos. And it was, and add that to the text messages and emails involved here, and clearly see that there was a lot of consensual sex going on here, and that's the reason why Diddy was not charged on sex trafficking, not charged on racketeering. Uh, well, leading up to a RICO charge. So that is what we are dealing with right now. So we will follow this as we move forward on Talk Live with regards to sentencing. We'll have a show in October with that, God willing, of course. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me here in Talk Live. We will move on to more subject matter as of next week. Back to usual fare because again, I have a few in the canister that I have yet to not to deal with yet, including, and I do mean including the um, the trial against Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry is involved in a lawsuit, very high profile one in and of itself, where it's another cash grab, ladies and gentlemen. I ain't gonna sugarcoat this. It's another cash grab, and it's the same for a lot of these high profile individuals. All these women are looking for is indeed their pound of flesh that comes through dollar bills. And that's exactly what Cassie received. That's what a lot of these ladies want to receive. And criminal activity, criminal convictions, no. That's what the U.S. People like the auspices, such as the U.S. Attorney's Office, are trying to look at. But badly handled in this case. So thank you very much for joining here at Talk Live. More subject matter starting next week. Back again next Tuesday with a full round of shows. But thank you very much for following me on this journey of the Diddy trial. These 6, 7, 8 weeks of trial. It was a roller coaster of emotions. It was a roller coaster of facts and well and videos and text messages and emails and blowing up cars and whatnot. But it was very salacious, to be fair. But again, very entertaining nonetheless. And again, the best team won in this instance. That is the defense team. So shout out to all the lawyers involved with the Mark Agnifilo team. Yeah, it was a fantastic performance by them and a stroke of genius for them not to use any sort of characters / expert witnesses to exonerate their client, Sean P. Diddy Combs. So thank you very much for joining me on Talk Live. Free Diddy should be on many shirts. I saw a shirt today saying Diddy didn't do it, and a few others out there. So again, the paraphernalia will be out there, and again, you are of free will to dance to Diddy songs once more. So thank you very much for joining me here at Talk Live. I mean, take that, and all that other good stuff. But anyways, we're done here. And thank you very much for joining me here at Talk Live on IG and YouTube. Like, subscribe, comment on the road to 1,000 subscribers. We'll be back next week for the new round of shows. So follow me here and like and subscribe on the road to 1,000 subscribers. And